Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Harshita. I welcome you all to the panel discussion Cloud Security, Governance and Assurance Inculcating Trust via Discipline Implementation. So, we have an eminent panel with us today. I welcome Commander Praveen Kumar, a veteran who have served over 2 decades in the Indian Navy. He retired into the corporate world and is presently the Group CISO of Z Entertainment Limited. Welcome you, sir.
Thank you, Harshita. I see a chair less, so do you mind if I stand and do the moderation? No problem. Thank you very much. Thank you, DSCI, for giving me this opportunity in this wonderful platform. Without much ado, let me invite the participants or the panelists. Uh, we have 4 panelists for the event. Mr. Munir Hassan Wani, he is Chief Information Security Officer of J&K Bank. Yeah, he's come. Hi. Mr. Vikas Barai, co-founder and CEO of Fire Compass. Mr. Brijesh Miglani, SSC strategist from ForcePoint. Mr. Mohammad Wasim, Group Vice President, Publicis. I'll stand. No problem, no problem.
Check.
Seems I have a right set of panelists today. I say that largely because most of the discussions of this sort which I have attended were largely concentrated towards BFSI and maybe services industries. Today we have with us the right mix with Mr. Wasim from the banking sector. We have a couple of folks from the product industry, this cybersecurity product industry, and we also have one of the panelists who has been driving the digital transformation in most of the large enterprises today. Without much ado, I would request the participants to quickly introduce themselves, please.
Very good afternoon, everybody. My name is Munir. I am the CISO of J&K Bank. Thank you.
I'm Bikash Barai and I'm the co-founder of Fire Compass.
Yeah, hi, my name is Brijesh Miglani and I'm driving a cloud transformation strategy for ForcePoint customers.
Hi, I'm Wasim. I lead the cloud strategy for Publicis Sapient across the world.
Thank you all. Setting the context, we all know that the 1700s were largely known for the Industrial Revolution. What Industrial Revolution largely meant was the transformation of manufacturing processes from what they were traditionally to automation of those processes. If you talk about the early 2000s, that is the present day, I'm sure the future generations are going to call this as the digital revolution, the period of digital revolution. Largely because most of the industries, most of the enterprises today, the processes are being digitized, they are being automated. What comes hand in hand with automation is the transformation towards the cloud. We all know that most of the enterprises today are moving towards cloud or have already moved towards cloud. Most of the enterprises are either in a hybrid mode, wherein they have their enterprise workloads on on-prem as well as on cloud, or they are in a multi-hybrid mode, wherein they have presence on-prem, a small presence on-prem, and large presence on multiple clouds. So I would like to know, with this as a background, I would like to know what kind of adoption has your industry in general and your enterprise in particular has adopted towards cloud migration. Has it been organic or has it been largely driven by the pandemic, wherein a lot of enterprises were forced to move into cloud?
Let me take this question first. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, so being from the banking industry, I'll give you the banking and BFSA perspective in this regard. Is banking has been on the forefront of the technology adoption or digital transformation, and we have been doing it over a period of last 3 decades continuously. Without means the milestones have been changing, but the objective was same, to actually serve the customers in a very secure and in a very means customer friendly manner. So that has been the objective. But we have seen many milestones in terms of digital transformation. While the industry has moved a bit ahead in terms of cloud adoption, there is a strange position which was taken by the banks with respect to adoption of cloud. That was a pure no-no. As on, I would say last 2.5 years, the banks were very critical in terms of moving their workloads to the cloud because of certain regulations which were unlikely being faced by other organizations. But of late, what has happened is there has been the direction from Reserve Bank of India, which has been the major, which has been the regulator of banking industry, wherein they have as well means what we call is moderated their view on cloud. And of late, we have seen a direction from Reserve Bank of India coming in, wherein they have actually given the leeway to the banks to move to the cloud subject to the fulfillment of certain conditions. And those conditions are ensure that the way you are actually protecting the customer information for confidentiality, integrity, authenticity, non-repudiation, functionality and performance within your captive setup, you need to ensure that if you go hybrid or if you go a pure play cloud setup, you need to ensure those factors are there. The second very important aspect is you need to ensure that the data or the workloads remain within the boundaries wherein the legislative powers are, means will remain within the boundaries of India. That is the second important factor. The third very important factor which they talk about is how do you ensure compliance and how do you ensure the same set of flexibility is provided with respect to audits and assurance which is in the captive setup. How do you ensure that the cloud service provider as well provides those things? So these are a couple of fundamental things which they have actually documented in their latest circular on IT outsourcing and cloud services. It just got ratified 2 months back, and banks have started moving up to the cloud, because I would say adoption of cloud, it's not the matter of if banks will go to the cloud. It's the matter of when banks will go to the cloud, because of the fact that this entire market is service provider driven. This entire market we have seen over a long period is OEM driven. And once this is being driven by the OEMs and service providers, there is no way for the consumers to say no to it. So this is my take on this. Thank you.
So Wasim, I wanted to put this question slightly in a different manner. I'm sure you have been in the middle of huge digital transformation projects. You've seen variety of customers. What is your take on this as to how the customer is looking at this transformation? Is it a strategy based? Has it been forced down their throat largely due to the pandemic and the requirements which emerged from that?
See, my take is that it's the question of relevance for future, right? How do you survive in an eyeball economy where if you miss an eyeball, you're actually losing revenue? And the entire eyeball economy is driven by our own as a customer for instant gratification. How many people have stopped buying books because they want the book now and it is downloaded immediately? In order to serve a customer on a blink of an eye, you cannot have a system that takes 6 months to get provisioned, right? And that's where cloud comes in. And when you look at cloud, fundamentally from engineering perspective, it is the titanic shift that has happened, a paradigm shift that is actually making a tangible asset to a software. Now, if you look at the industries that are adopting cloud, they need deep engineering so that the infrastructure, which is cloud, is coded as an application. And that's where the entire paradigm is shifting. I work across 8 industries, and across 8 industries, my job is to steward that journey to build the landing zones in order for the instant gratification of the consumers, not my customers. So the customers are not responding to the ask of the clients, they are missing on their revenue models. And that's why you see the brick and mortar model of even the financial organization that used to spend the most amount of money, they are getting into the neo banks which are all cloud. There is no brick and mortar. If you look at uh, banks which are like only in cloud, they do more revenue much more efficiently than anybody else who have massive infrastructure to run. So I think this avalanche has stopped or has already started. I don't think like it can stop by saying that we would not go to cloud and we would want to keep the infrastructure close to our heart in our data centers.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Brijesh, from the products landscape, in the what we have observed in the last 3 to 4 years is that most of the products which were deployed on-prem and the cost for that deployment was a kind of a one-time cost with small percentage of it being towards the licensing year on year. What we have seen is that the SaaSification of security products has affected the end user in a large way. Most of the costs which used to be capitalized before have become OpEx now, and year on year cost seems to be constant. So once SaaSification and cloud journey has become advantageous for the customers from the operational point of view, from the security product landscape, it seems to have taken the customers by surprise. What are your views on that?
So, as I think Munir and Wasim mentioned, as you see transformations happening on the customer side of it, these are transformations which also happen from a product side of it, right? So, as you mentioned, an on-premise component, and typically when a product company understand this, they understand it from a cost of the goods services, right? COGS cost to any product company. Now, from a hardware perspective, definitely there is a one-time cost which you give it to a customer, and then customer go and maintain it in terms of the maintenance, upgrades, and all those costs associated to it, which typically, if you see, has been wiped off in a cloud piece, right? They don't need to maintain hardwares and all. And then from a product side, if you see, there are two types of a delivery model which you have seen. One, where you are hosting your own components in the cloud, or where you are leveraging an IaaS services for delivering to the cloud based on product company to product company, right? So the point here is that you maybe customer is not directly hitting a cost of maintaining a hardware and all, right? Because it's coming as a service back to them in an OpEx model, and that's what most of the customers are looking for to definitely go and reduce their capex cost. The point here is for a product company, it's still a cost that they have to occur, right? By hosting their models in the co-locations or maybe in an IaaS provider. So for a customer, it's an easy thing because they have to consume it as a service, right? And I think the best thing is how you go and book a Uber cab today, right? It's a easy to go to a particular application and say book a cab, rather than reaching out to an auto, to a rickshaw, or to a taxi to cover that. So definitely the cost is there from an OpEx perspective. But if you see from an overall security and the kind of ransomware we have seen asked by an attacker, like if you have seen the AIMS attack, right? The entire healthcare goes down for that particular services. I think it's still a beneficial for a customer if I see from that angle.
Thanks for that. So because you offer a very niche service in the cybersecurity realm, that is red teaming. You moved these services onto a automated platform. So how, from your point of view, from where you look at the cloud landscape, how do you think the overall red teaming has changed from what it was before this rapid movement towards cloud and what it is now after most of the organizations or enterprises have moved towards cloud?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me share some insights, and thanks for setting the context. So what we are essentially doing is we are doing continuous internet-wide monitoring, discovering what are the assets which are up there in deep dark surface web, and what are the vulnerabilities associated with it. Now, there's a very interesting difference between when we do this continuous automated red teaming on cloud versus non-cloud. And here is a very interesting thing, that when we do it for the cloud, we find it harder. Okay, so if any of you think like a company which is like more hybrid, less cloud, we find it a lot easier to break in. Okay, so I don't know if you guessed it or not, but cloud makes it slightly harder for us to break in certain ways. So I'll share also from the cloud perspective, like why it is hard and what are the Achilles heel which we try to exploit. So our platform is continuously finding assets, then being like the attacker and attacking it. What red teaming was like a point-in-time service, now there's this new trend to make it continuous and automated. So the reason why it is harder is that the cloud IPs are transient. The IPs are continuously changing. So it's a much harder problem for us to find out which is your asset. Your IPs are changing. But then also, like not just us, there are the product companies which has innovated and created this. And we are in a way proud that from India, we are one of the creators of this category called CART. So it's very hard to say who is the first, but at least we are one of the creators. We did not copy, but we have others who copied us. Now, one interesting thing is we also figured out certain ways on how to kind of still find out the assets, but it is much harder problem. So there are some ways we can correlate, but in some cases we are not able to identify that this asset belongs to you. So that's one. Now, what are the Achilles heel which we are observing? So here are some very interesting insights. You have seen a lot of cases, all these breaches come up in news, this big company got breached, their application data is out, etc. 90% of the cases where we were involved, where we came in later, we found out that the main application did not get breached. So even though in the news it seems like that the main application got breached, it is one of their pre-production system which had production keys. Or somebody in their team went and created a new application, put it up online. The central security team was not aware of it, and now because it is cloud, so cloud does one thing very well. Cloud scales. It amplifies. It amplifies good things, it amplifies bad things, it amplifies ugly things, so it just amplifies. It's a super scaling mechanism. So now it is a lot easier for people to go and create a new application, make it online, this admin page is now exposed. So attackers generally, in most of these large breaches, found out a different way to enter, not through the main door. So that's one interesting insight. And which are those other doors through which people enter? These pre-production systems. Some unknown application which somebody has created, made it online. And they just need one such door of entry for a period of like 1 day. That's good enough for them, right? Then misconfiguration is one of the top reasons why breaches are happening. Like one of the major banking industry, financial services industry breaches which caused probably maximum number of data exposure in India. It was because their MongoDB was exposed and Mongo's default installation is insecure. There was no password and the customer data was exposed, and this was made online by one of their vendors. Okay. So misconfigurations, OpenDB, pre-prod systems, and some entry not through the main direct application but through some sideway entry is what is giving us success when we are trying to kind of break in. Let me ask one interesting question, and I got kind of surprised. When Verizon DBIR came up recently, can you guess what is the number one reason why applications are getting breached? Can somebody guess? Yes? Or I mean like specific type of vulnerability which, like you have WAS top 10, etc., right? What do you guess, like what caused the maximum number of breaches? Misconfigurations or identity loss. See, this was something very interesting when I noticed that it is this some leaked password, some credential stuffing. That kind of attack is the number one reason for applications getting breached. And that is not part of WAS top 10. look at this. WAS top 10 suggests that these are the top 10 things which you should take care as defender. But when you look at the real breaches, it is happening because of something else, some stolen credentials and things like that. So when we are doing this automated red teaming from outside in, these are the kind of interesting things which we are seeing. And when you look at inside, it's a slightly different scenario. I mean, 20 years back when we first got started, when we did internal pen testing, it was like ARP poisoning. You all remember those days, right? Now it is Active Directory. So these are some interesting insights. I'll let others talk more. Thanks.
So very nice, Vikas. What came out of this first round of discussions largely is that cloud is here to stay. There's no two ways about it. Secondly, year on year, the spending on cloud is only going to increase. As Vikas brought out, which was probably a bit surprising to me, was that the red teamers find it difficult to breach cloud. But however, the statistics say otherwise, that the adversaries are able to exploit cloud easier than the on-prem. One reason which probably somebody from the audience brought out is the skill set which is there to manage the on-prem infrastructure is well equipped as compared to the skill set which is there to manage the cloud infrastructure. With that as background, I would like to know from each one of you as to what do you think are the challenges which the industry is facing today to address the security on cloud.
Okay, I'll again take this question first. So thank you very much. You tossed a word about shadow IT in cloud. So that's the new thing for me. Yes, that's very important. So and identity and access management threats. So what we talk about. So when we talk about the challenge in adoption of cloud, actually the major challenge with adoption of the cloud with the organizations which my colleague just now, some of them he mentioned, some of them I will add on. One important facet which we are talking about is everybody has been seen to rush towards cloud without talking about what should we what should be our cloud adoption strategy. So probably people have to work on their cloud adoption strategies. We cannot talk about taking everything to the cloud. I'm sure in my environment, there might be multiple applications, multiple data sets, multiple services, multiple products. Wherein I would not want them to take to the cloud because they will make no sense for me to take them to cloud. Yeah, there might be multiple other services or products which we may have to take to the cloud. From BFSA perspective, I'm telling you, for example, we talk about consuming a lot of fintech environments nowadays. If there is a, for example, paisabazar.com, I want to do an integration. Invariably, paisabazar.com kind of company is on fintech. Whether I love it or I hate it, I invariably am consuming their API and thus I am also on cloud. So it would mean the first thing, every organization must have a cloud adoption and security policy in place. And that should define the roadmap in terms of which way we are going, what has to go onto cloud, what is to be dropped out of the cloud. And then second very important thing is the cloud governance aspect. We spoke about, for example, the vendors doing the cloud implementation. For example, we have the cloud service provider giving us the infra platform as a service, or for example, infra as a service. Then we tie up with some cloud access brokers or cloud access security brokers and ask them to deploy them. Whether those resources are doing that due diligence and they have that competence while delivering those services. So that cloud governance framework should address these things. The second important thing is, we would see same issues which we have been facing in the captive environment. We'll see it in what we call as cloud environment, identity thefts. We would see Active Directory, password spraying attacks. We would see many other attacks, OWASP top 20. And now we are talking about not only OWASP top 20, we are as well talking about, for example, API top 10, which has been released by OWASP recently. So API security is one of the concerns. Once we integrate the cloud with our captive environment, there we need to focus on what we call as effective risk management, the security risk management, a continuous risk assessment in terms of what has been deployed by service provider today. Do we have a checklist in place in terms of validating whether this implementation has been successful? Do we do a continuous vulnerability assessment and penetration testing? Do we do a continuous configuration assessment of these assets? Do we do the red teaming, blue teaming exercises of these assets? And once that qualifies for that, it doesn't mean that once it has been deployed, it is successfully done and everything is done. There is a report from Gartner which says 99.5% of cyber attacks can be thwarted if we just maintain basic hygiene. And basic hygiene means, again, talking about basic hygiene, I will not go into details because basic hygiene means how do we manage our change management process, how do we do the vulnerability management process, how do we focus on identity and access management processes. So that basic hygiene is to be maintained, and not standing with this as a one-time activity. This has to be a complete risk management cycle which is to be driven continuously over a period of time. You cannot say that once it is done, it is safe and secure. So that process. And third is compliance. I would say the major challenge which banking industry as of now has been facing was, one, the data localization. The data boundaries should be, for example, within India. The second, the right to audit. Do I have that visibility onto the infrastructure of the cloud service provider? Do we have that access to the infrastructure of cloud service provider who is providing me, for example, as infrastructure as a service or a platform as a service? Now, if I'm taking infrastructure as a service from a cloud service provider, who is running that baseline? For example, up till, if it is an IAS, there are certain set of rules which are certain set of obligations which are defined for the customer, certain set of obligations which are defined for the cloud service provider. So both of the providers have the role. So how do we manage those roles? Do we have a detailed scope of work? The scoping has been one of the major issues with respect to cloud, I may say, wherein we say, okay, we want to take this software as a service, and this is an application as a this application we need to take as a service. Then scoping becomes a challenge if it is not documented. A major challenge. We say, okay, we want to take, for example, some cloud workload with this security. They say, okay, this is given, and then we say, okay, now it doesn't have these 10 features. No, now you have to enable them, and these are the features wherein you have to shell out extra money. So you have to talk about funding. You have to talk about contract management. So these are some of the core concerns which everybody should be focused on while going with cloud, or before going with cloud. These things should be put in consideration because they are major challenge in adoption of cloud. Thank you.
Rightly brought out, Munir. It brings me back to that point which we were discussing just before the pre-panel discussion. You brought out another point saying that the cyber security folks, we are largely being driven by the tools. The hygiene which you just brought out cannot be maintained just by using tools. We are largely being dependent on the tools to give us those insights, forgetting the first principles of cyber security. Yeah, Vijay, over to you.
I'll just add what Munir mentioned, right? I think the first important part is that the security cannot sit outside the application. There has to be a shift left with lots of activity that you do on security as a job description. It has to get embedded when you are actually writing the code. That is very important because every service that you will see coming out of the cloud providers would be rock solid. The reason why it will be rock solid is because it's their bread and butter. So keep in mind that when they release a service, that will be which is like a supercar and drive it fast.
So Brijesh and Vikas, I wanted to put the same question from the other side. How, from the industry side, from the product industry, how are you looking at filling these gaps or mitigating these gaps, or how are your products helping us to overcome these gaps which have been brought out by the user side?
So see, when I started from a cloud, right, we all started our careers with an on-premise, and we all transformed and talking about a cloud now. So the first thing which I think we all need to understand is a shared responsibility, which is the first missing piece, which I'll say most of the customers typically overpass and say, I have bought this service from you, give me a security. So there's a clear mandate of a shared responsibility models which are defined for a SaaS provider and as IaaS providers as well. And the one thing which Maureen mentioned very perfectly is most of the time we think from a product and you mentioned tool will solve the problem. It will not. It will always be process. And I always say in most of the sessions, stick to basics. That's very important. And you can always check when you understand that if the framework came to a security, how you're understanding and adopting that framework in your policies. As simple as that, in 2018, when the Carta came into thing, right, as a framework, it was purely saying do a continuous assessment for your risk and trust. And that's what he mentioned right now. We always feel that, okay, one time we have done a vulnerability assessment, it's good to go. Let that server live for years, right? And every time we have to ask for a change management, server band nahi karna bhai. Restart nahi milega. All these things will come. So from a product side of it, the one thing which product companies started adopting is they are aligning their tools and their services based on those frameworks. Because when you go in a market and there are so many tools, so many options available, what is your reference criteria to go and evaluate? That's where the models like Carta, models like SASE will help. And that's why most of the product companies are aligned to it. Because when you're going on a cloud, they mentioned from an identity stolen and other data. It's not only your users going there, your user data is also going there. So CISA typically simplify, I follow and read it very deep, that if you want to go and move to a cloud, focus on it from a zero trust architectures. And at least focus from a 5 pillars which are prevalent and constant within your organization: identity, user, network, your applications, and data. If you align your adoption policy based on these 5 pillars individually, then only you can go and get rid of these challenges. Definitely, we as a product company can help on the services and the software side of it, but it needs to be aligned within those processes. So that's my input.
Yeah, this is a very difficult question, and I was just thinking about it. So, if you look at what's the solution, what are the product technology companies, etc., doing, there are many solutions, right? So everybody will come and say, you take this solution, and
That's
you will
exactly
have
the
the happy
problem we are
life.
facing.
Yeah, ये ताबीज ले लो, सब कुछ ठीक हो जाएगा. So what is the solution then? So the interesting thing is, I think that there's no single solution. Let me tell you one interesting kind of realization in my life in a slightly non-security context, and we have been through this in our life as well. When we are young, we think like if we get a good house, nice house, we'll be happy. If we have a nice car, we'll be happy. Or if we get a beautiful wife or a spouse, we'll be happy. But then you get married and then you realize, no, that's not the path to happiness, right? So interestingly, if you look at different types of folks are out there, right? There are some people who are generally happy, even if there is something bad that happens in their life, they'll after some time forget and come back to happy state. And then there are some people who are generally unhappy. Whatever good thing happens in their life, they'll forget that and come back to unhappy state, right? So I think cybersecurity is very much like the happiness problem. One is we don't understand what happiness is. It's very vague. कोई एक solution है नहीं. Same with security. We don't understand. It's very vague. There's no single solution. But secondly, whatever we do, we can't be always secure. There will be those moments when we will be vulnerable and we'll get compromised. It's about being like that generally happy person that can you come back to the safe state quickly? Can you come back to the resilient state? Whatever that is. So that is the reason why NIST came up with this framework of identify, protect, detect, and then respond and recover, right? So when we look at security, I would rather say it's not really about the technology, but with this strategy where we are building a resilient security program. That's very important. Acknowledge there will be moments of unhappiness in life, but we can come back to happy state. Acknowledge there will be those states when we'll be insecure, but come back to the safe state. So that's one very broad strategic thing. But there are, I also like as a cybersecurity entrepreneur, and since we are building product company, I have to, and I like this personally, look into like what are the trends which are happening. So there are two interesting trends which I'm noticing in the industry. One trend is the movement to respond and recover, which is like the XDR trend. And XDR is there in many different avatars. In SOC, this, that, endpoint, you will see XDR in many different avatars. That's one movement. The second movement is the continuous movement. So these are the two major movements which I'm noticing. And the continuous movement is happening in many different avatars. Like we are into continuous automated red teaming or continuous attack surface management. But there is also another avatar of continuous, which is zero trust. And people don't realize this. Like zero trust is a very big paradigm shift. And what zero trust is most of the times is misunderstood. See, we have all these authentication, etc., all this security, everything was there before, micro-segmentation, but that's not zero trust. The core philosophy of zero trust is that previous to zero trust, if I trust you once, that is, you give your username and password, if I trust you once, then the trust is established. It's a rock solid trust. The trust never changes. Zero trust says you evaluate the trust continuously. Now look at this, it's also a continuous movement, moving from a one-time trust establishment to continuous trust. So the core philosophy of zero trust is actually not all those micro-segmentation architecture, ZTNA, nothing. The core philosophy is continuous trust evaluation. In fact, I consider the word zero trust as a very misguided word which forces people to think about it wrongly. I mean, security guys don't trust, right? Auditors don't trust. We always at zero trust. But it is about continuous trust evaluation. So these are the two major movements. The movement of things getting continuous, the movement of moving from that protection kind of mindset to detection, respond, and recover mindset. So these are the two major kind of strategic shifts which I'm seeing in the industry, and I think that's the only way to achieve whatever can be achieved.
I've just been prompted by Harshita that we are already on the top of the hour. However, I'll take the liberty of posting one more question before I throw it open to the audience for the Q&A session. Whenever we talk about governance, the first thing that comes to our mind is probably restriction, red tape, bureaucracy, right? That's what the first thing that anybody thinks the moment I talk about governance is, oh, you know, the security folks are going to come up with something, what not to do, how not to do, and blah, blah, blah. Once you talk about cloud governance, the overall framework has taken a backseat largely due to one major reason. I feel I would like the views of the panelists here. Largely because compliance and governance were largely driven by the banking fraternity, and the cloud adoption of the banking fraternity was one of the last. Rest of the industry moved ahead, and then the bankers started adopting cloud. I think that's the reason today. This clubbed with the other factor that there was not a planned migration from on-prem to cloud. It happened in a very inorganic manner. Those are the reasons I think that today the cloud governance in most of the organizations is a gray area. What are your views on that?
Absolutely, yes. The kind of inorganic movement which we are seeing in the migration of workloads from captive setup to the cloud setup has stand a testimony to the fact that probably there is no governance in place for cloud adoption. So as I just in my previous response, as I said, very important thing is that the governance has to be in place. Means we have to be the cloud governance has to be put in place in alignment to your IT organizational governance structure, and the roles of responsibility with respect to the roles and responsibilities of board of directors, the roles and responsibilities of your senior management, the roles of and responsibilities of the people who are managing it, and the roles of responsibilities also of the entire supply chain needs to be documented and well communicated across all channels. This is very important. Second, the governance will as well talk about why they will ask those 5-6 questions in terms of why, what, where, if, why do we want to go to the cloud? Is it, for example, taking a workload on the cloud which is not yielding you a benefit of, for example, say 10 rupee, and spending something $1,000 on that makes no commercial sense to go to the cloud. So those all things will form a part of governance structure. And second important thing is, once the governance part is done, the risk evaluation, the risk management. So complete GRC life cycle, IT governance, the cloud security governance, cloud security risk management, and cloud security compliance culture needs to be inculcated within this entire process. Because by moving the workload, we are just doing the technology piece. We have to ensure, and we have been always speaking with each other about three important parameters. You can have successful technology in place, you can have very beautiful processes in place, but if the users do not adhere to those processes and that technology, it is going to fail. If we have beautiful processes in place and users are adhering to those processes and no technology in place, it is still going to fail. So you need to ensure that your people, processes, and technologies are aligned together to make it a big success. That's very important. I would say the first thing what every organization must do is to put in cloud adoption and security framework in place. And you don't have to reinvent it, to be very honest. We have seen, for example, the cloud adoption is nothing more than the expansion of the existing cybersecurity framework to the cloud environment. And you have the cybersecurity framework, like, for example, you have NIST cybersecurity framework, you have ISO 27001, 2013, added with ISO 27001, 2017 and 18, which talks about cloud security. And you have CIS framework talking about baseline and fundamental and very means intermediate controls which are to be put in place for maintaining the baseline security. So just adhere to those basics and things will be wonderful. Thank you.
Very nicely brought out. I mean, the two things which you really highlighted here was, first is people, process, technologies, the pillars of cybersecurity. Secondly, you don't have to, pluck out these governance and assurance framework from the sky. They are already present in some form of the other. You just have to modify and adhere to it. Very nicely brought out. Harshita, if you can allow me to take a few questions from the audience. Anybody from the audience, please?
Just anybody can take the question. If I'm migrating from cloud to telecom environment, what are the three important privacy aspects I need to consider? Please consider on telecom environment.
See, very important thing is from telecom perspective, if you are just migrating your workloads from your captive environment to cloud, what is your crown jewel at the end of it? It is the customer data, correct? Customer credentials. You need to ensure that the data at rest security has been devised in a proper way, wherein the keys for that encryption are not with the CSP but with you. So that's very important. We talk about cryptography and all. We talk about, for example, storing. How do you store your key encryption keys and data encryption keys, DEC keys and KEK keys? Usually in cloud environment, what we have seen is the service provider gives you the space and then you say, okay, I migrated my data. So who is responsible for that data, or the privacy of that data? So very important thing from, if there are very tight regulations and you need to ensure confidentiality, integrity and authenticity of that data which you are putting at rest on the cloud environment, you need to ensure that the DEC keys and KEK keys are always with the customer, with the telecom, with you. It should be available with you, not with the cloud service provider. Second very important thing is data in transit. Again, how do you access this workload? Whether you are using TLS 1.2 or you are using vanilla IPsec encryptions. So that I leave the technology part to you, but these are the two core factors. How do you do that? So that's very important.
So let me.
In that case again, the cloud service provider had not given the keys with the customer. He was holding those keys. Absolutely.
So let me do one thing. So let me do one thing. I mean, I do not have the answer to your question. I cannot say what are the top 3 things to do, but let me share what is one thing not to do. Okay, what is that one thing not to do? And I'll tell from the perspective of, we work with, is this audible? Is it? Yeah. We work with, I think, 5 out of the top 10 telcos globally. So based on that experience, let me tell you what not to do. Okay. So this is from practical real life experience. Okay. So here is this thing what we have seen. So here is an interesting thing which we have noticed in most of the cases where we got access to their customer data. It had always been an orphaned application. And I'll give you an example. For one of the largest telecom companies globally, one of the biggest names, this um, this company, they had some application hosted which was created by marketing 6 or 7 years back. There was a campaign, customer data got collected there, then things got migrated to cloud, different application, but people forgot about that. So not knowing your entire asset inventory, having some orphaned application is one of the things not to do. That what I can tell. Now what to do from the privacy perspective, I have less of idea. I'm not a privacy professional and I look at things more from adversary perspective. So if I'm trying to break into an organization, I would look for this kind of weak points and I'll not try to break your main application. Because your main application, I can more or less be sure if you are a bank and a large telco, it is safe.
Yeah, this question is to you, sir. So when you discussed about zero trust and when you mentioned about continuous zero trust, but that conflicts with the user experience, right? So what is your take on it? Okay. Of course, like a security engineer, we definitely would
so it will enhance the user experience, and let me explain how. And this is a very interesting story. Around 7 or 8 years back, I think I was speaking at RSA conference in the US, and I met some really great folks at a speaker event. This guy was from Israel. I'm forgetting his name. Big authority. He was talking about the same context. Zero trust name was not there. Like how you can do this trust evaluation of an individual based on behavior. So behavior based trust. So based on how you are doing what you are doing, your system, etc., give you a value of trust. Now that kind of technology was being used by a handful of organizations in the world. Very few people had access to that. Now here is an interesting story. I went to US around a couple of months back. There is one company which just got seed funded. Seed funding, that means they don't have a product yet, etc., for $40 million. And what are they doing? They're making this feature, what we are talking about, absolutely accessible and available to everybody. So today, if you go to Amazon, do you give your password? Do you remember giving password? No. You go to other places, there's more password. And what Amazon is doing is continuous trust evaluation
basically
and
UABA,
zero trust.
UABA,
Yes.
basically.
Whatever you might call. So look at Amazon's experience from continuous trust evaluation. The user experience has become better. So what I mean to say is once the technology matures, the user experience is going to get better. And this company I'm talking about, I know them closely. Fantastic set of guys. They are going to make this technology available to all, and anybody will be able to then have access to that. So long story short, it is not going to affect the user experience, but it is going to make the user experience better. But it will take some time.
The only thing just to add is which happened in the security is the context attributes, because how you typically go and build that trust evaluation, the context attributes are there to go and do that continuous. So maybe as simple as if a
Trust is always established. Basically.
yeah, always established with some or other parameters. Okay, and that's what is changing over the security piece of it.
So largely it's misunderstood. Zero trust is slightly misunderstood things, saying that it's going to ask me for password again and again. It's not so. We've seen so many zero trust products. It does not mean it asks or prompts for a user authentication again and again, but it uses more than one parameters to build that trust.
And the example from BFSA perspective is for this kind of adaptive authentication is enterprise fraud management systems adopted by the banks. If you do the transaction, for example, 2 transactions, probably you will give your normal username and an OTP and all. But if you do 3-4 transactions together, it will pop up for an additional authentication. That is what we usually call as a behavior-based or identity-based, adaptive authentication, which have been put in place by almost all the banks across globe. So this is a technology which will further mature up, And then now when we are talking about the passwordless authentication, the what we call is uh, the behavioral pattern or the vocal patterns being recognized by the system, and then they give you the access. And the access would be based for certain set of privilege. If you try to move beyond that context, it will ask for re-authentication and all. This is how it is happening. Thank you.
I think you are audible. You can shoot your questions.
Yeah, sure. So this sort of thing. I have basic query kind of, because cloud is very dynamic and business need more and more solutions to look for ambiguities and develop more solutions, right, for the clients. And for IT, when we say assurance and governance, we have MongoDB today, tomorrow's MongoDB, then TongoDB. How the baselines of hardening and governance can be established for this dynamic requirements, and how you have any use case or you want to discuss about it? What is the guidance that dynamic environment is there, but how SME or administrator or a compliance assurance guy can give assurance that okay, we are compliant against those UTI environments, or those UTI environments will be converted to a production environment one day, right? Maybe we are not aware, maybe we are aware in some cases, but the approach or policy approach is not ready for that. Those new requirements that are coming up, right? So, yeah. So I think, see, cloud is something which makes it very, very massive, right? And in terms of number, right? And when you have things in huge number, you need some system to manage. You can't do it manually. So I somehow believe that there's no other way apart from automation. And there are certain set of technologies, like cloud workload protection, cloud security posture management. So we at Fire Campus, we don't work on any of them, maybe you guys do, right? Cloud security posture management and CWP and CSPM, that's the only way to go. There's no other way. I don't think it is manually possible to manage and scale, but just tools are not enough. Just like all of you mentioned, right? It's a combination of people, process, technology, but without technology, it is necessary but not sufficient. These products are necessary but not sufficient. You'll have to have the other things also. Maybe any of you want to add?
Yeah, I've already called that out, like, shifting left and more of convergence, right? We have been talking about DevOps, where operation actually converges with the development. Now DevSecOps is coming, where security is actually shifting lots of roles into development, and now the environment propagates automatically to production. And when you have governance, which are automated implementation of policies, everything that goes to production have to go through those policies again and again every time it gets implemented.
We can give a bad report to SME, but SME will say, okay, I don't have a baseline for this. What is the solution for that?
Sorry, say that again.
I'm saying, a bad guy or a CSPM report, we can give a bad report to the SME. You're not compliant. You need to follow the posture, but I don't have a baseline to follow. Right?
Yeah. So, and that's where, like, the collaboration between. So when you work in silos, you turn to be bozos, right? And that's where the killing aspect comes into the new world of how you would want to go fast. So the more collaboration it happens, right? In the world of cloud, security have to collaborate with development, operations, even finance too, right? The FinOps is another big one that actually is a big topic of conversation in the space of cloud adoption. So everything have to converge and shift and concentrate in the platform.
Just to
CSPs are providing all the CSPs are providing the baseline. Yeah. So Amazon or whoever, you can get it from them, and also the tools which I mentioned, they also they have built-in checklists for those baseline.
So what Muni mentioned previously is those benchmarks, whether those are CIS benchmarks or ISOs or NIST, those are already there to be on the cloud, and the same reference model or same checklist you will get with the CSPM tool to understand your misconfigurations or your baseline deviations from that.
The acclimatization of those for your environment is done.
Yeah.
And notwithstanding that, there are the baselines which are always being published by, for example, the industry peers like CIS, NIST and all, but then you need to customize it based on your requirements. Eventually, it is you. For example, if CIS tells you to put L1 and L2 controls in place, at the end of it, it is you as an organization who has to do the risk evaluation and define what is suited for me create a checklist, have it approved, and that becomes obligatory for you to follow, and that becomes obligatory for auditor to follow for subsequent audits and all. So, absolutely. It's dynamic. You have to, and believe me, it has been like that always. Means it's an ever-changing industry. Thank you.
Yeah, please.
See, for cloud security, I would say it's not like an organization can have its own framework. Eventually, every framework which you actually build upon, there are four things. One, we talk about policies and overarching document to be in place. Then we talk about procedures, the standard operating procedures. How do you want to operate the cloud and all? How do you want to manage the cloud? And then we are talking about standards. Standards are not obligatory for you to follow, but they give you the industry, they give you the 360-degree view in terms of how industry should move. Okay, so they give you the best practices, and it is up to you as an end user, what do you want to adopt from that framework. But eventually, whatever framework you adopt from governance perspective is to be approved by your board of directors to be in place, because eventually you cannot say, okay, this is my framework, it will be with me. But I would say, for example, we have many government organizations over here in finance sector. Leave aside finance sector, Ministry of Information Technology, MIT, Government of India has come up with a cloud adoption framework, which talks about, even they have not only spoken about how do you do the cloud evaluation, cloud testing, cloud procurement. They also give you one more document which is on their website, talking about how do you evaluate your vendors for your cloud requirements. And those documents actually have to be consumed, ingested, and put in your system to make a holistic framework in alignment with some industry best practices. It might be NIST framework, it might be CIS framework, it might be ISO 27001 2022 now with amended 2017 and 18 guidelines. So you can take that as a framework and make your framework which is suited for you. Maybe there are 100 controls you would want, there are 100 control objectives, you want to fulfill them with for example 77 controls. That is a call which you have to take based on your risk appetite. That's why we are talking about the risk assessment cycle has to be continuous. Continuous cycle. For example, for any certification which you want to go for, I am not sure which industry you are from, but every industry, for whatever standard you want to maintain, you have to do a regular cycles of vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, configuration assessment. That is a baseline security which you have to maintain. It is not like it is not a one-off thing, you have done it and it's closed. It is a continuous life cycle which you have to manage. That's very important. You have to take care of there are again two parts, the responsibilities. If you are taking an infrastructure as a service, you know what are your core responsibilities with respect to your platform. But when you talk about cloud, that comes under the assurance service or the what you call the audit service, wherein you have to have an engagement with your cloud service provider. Guys, are you doing the penetration testing? You have to give me the report of that penetration testing. That's very important. Because, for example, if you are trusting some service provider, putting a workload on their environment, it is obligation on him that he assures you of the security. And how does he assure you? It's not like, chalo mujh pe bharosa kar lo, main manta hu, aap mujhe jante ho, I'm your neighbor. It's like you have to, this is an organization to organization contract, wherein he has to ensure that there is an intermediary which is certifying that yes, he has been audited, his controls are in place. That is how it happens across industries. SOC 2, SOC 3 kind of certifications, correct. Thank you.
That most of the breaches today are, majority of them, I read one of the reports, I think it was some 85 to 86% of the breaches today are attributed to misconfigurations. If governance would cover all this configuration part, I don't think there was a requirement of cloud pen testing. But cloud pen testing is what brings out what are those misconfigurations which largely are due to human errors, due to unskilled cloud administrators and various other reasons. So pen testing is what would actually bring out these issues. Not all of them. The tools are as good as the person behind the tool, as good as the person who operates the tool. That's what we were just talking about. There's no tool which can assure you of 100% security. A tool forms a dashboard whereby you are, rather than searching deep into the environment, you get a bird's eye view of how the security posture is. But if you think that the tools are going to give an end-to-end assurance of security, I think we've still not reached that state yet. Thank you, Harshita, for being so patient. Thank you, all the panelists, for the amazing insights.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
And a big shout out to all the audience for being patient with us. Thank you very much.